Paragraph 6, utter unworldliness of the text. Nothing prevents the Chinese from glimpsing the invisible essence of things. And so I make a note here about my Kodiak kindergarten candy thief. Some of you may have heard me mention this before, but there was, when I lived in Kodiak, Alaska, I was 6 and 7 years old, and in my kindergarten class was another boy who was a liar, and I could always see when he was lying. It was like I was seeing a light that went on around him, a kind of aura around him when he was lying. So I always knew that he was lying. And so I always saw the invisible essence of things around this boy. And I don't know, you can take it for what it's worth, but you know, there's definitely an experience that I had when I was 6 and 7 years old that was a numinous experience to me. I still remember it very clearly. And I remember where I was and how I was talking to him and what the topic was. And, and so what Dr. Jung is saying here is that the Chinese have developed organically a way to see into the invisible essence of things, the unconscious, basically, is what he's talking about. And so one of the things that he's emphasizing is that it's sensible to fulfill your instinctive demands versus fear-ridden repression, which can only cause neurosis, and that causes inescapable psychologic conclusions. We're talking about paragraph 6 now, and so his point is and this relates to individuation as well, that all of us know how to become a human being, okay, unconsciously. Just like an oak tree grows from an acorn, and that acorn has within it the essence of becoming an oak tree. And not only that, it becomes that unique oak tree. There are no two oak trees the same, and yet every oak tree has certain characteristics about it that make it an oak tree. And so the same applies to human beings, and so that's the individuation process. And so one of the aspects of individuation that Dr. Jung talks about is the fact that we have to try to be in connect as much as possible with the unconscious, which is the part of us that knows how to be a human being, and to fulfill what the instinct is making us become. Obviously, our instinct knows how to make a heart, and it knows how to make our stomach and our lungs, and it knows how to copy the cells of those organs throughout our lifetime, so that we change our cells every 7 years, as so they say. I'm not an expert on that, but in any case, the objective that Dr. Jung tries to approach is an objective of becoming what you were meant to be and what the meaning of your life is. And only you can do that through understanding your own unconscious. Obviously, some aspects of it you do without any conscious awareness of what the unconscious does, Obviously, all your cell reproduction and that sort of thing is done without you having any awareness of it. And so, probably more than 95% of the becoming of you happens totally automatically. But that little bit that refers to that creates this ego self-axis, that's the part that you want to try to expand on the ego side as much as possible. And so in paragraph 7, he's talking about beware of confusing the intellect with the spirit, instinct. And a couple of examples that I have are, if you ever go to the art store or the tool department in Sears, it happens in both places for me, I immediately start thinking of all the projects I could do that I would love to do with the art supplies or with the tools at Sears. And so I take that feeling as instinctual, as my instinct saying, man, I'd like to go create and do something with those things. It's the so that spirit is greater than intellect. And I've done things with art and painting, and I've done things with writing, obviously, too, and I've done things with tools, made things in many different forms. And so what I find is that my life works better when I'm creating. And one of the funny things that you might think hilarious is that I think a lot of, I think highly of these adult coloring books. And why? And the reason is because they give you the opportunity to express something. And it's not that I've used them a lot. My mother-in-law loves them and does a lot of things with them. But on one occasion, my wife bought me 24 colored pencils and an adult coloring book. So I was working on a mandala from this adult coloring book, and I said to myself, well, what I want to do is I want to know what my unconscious wants to do, because this is a creative activity. And so I want to be sensitive to what's coming through from my unconscious. And so what I did was I would sit there and I would look at each little space that was already delineated. The picture was already delineated in black and white on this coloring book. And so I would look at each space, and then I would look at the 24 pencils, and I just sort of let my finger go down the line and pick the pencil that my psyche said it wanted at that time. I tried to be sensitive to that. And so I started to do that, and after an hour, all of a sudden, I just started to sob. And I've had that experience before. I've described it on video on the YouTube channel here, where that's definitely a breakthrough to the unconscious. And what I found is that when I'm doing something creative, whatever it is, and I consider doing this YouTube channel one of my creative activities, my life simply works better. And it's not that I'm any great artist. I'm not going to ever sell a lot of work. I've sold a few paintings and I've sold a few books, but nothing serious. And but my life just generally works better if I'm doing something creative. And so I don't know why. It's a mystery, but it does work. Now, also in this in this paragraph 7 we're talking about. I've taken figure 6 from Edward Edinger's Aion lectures, which is his description of the ego-self axis. And so when you're born, you're in this left circle where the self encompasses the ego. You have no ego. Children, until they're about 3 years old, don't understand themselves as a separate being. And so they're totally consumed by the self. But as you move to the right on these various images here, your ego becomes stronger and stronger until it separates itself from the self, and then you're on this axis between this duality between the self and the ego. And the self is always the greater center of the personality, as the ego becomes differentiated from the self in the process of psychological development. And so I've talked heavily on this channel about the development of ego, and you can find that under how to have an authentic life. And I'm referring to the Job Archetype, which is how to build up your ego. And that is done by Contest-DEFEAT-LAMENTATION-REBIRTH. Okay, so what Dr. Edinger observed, and even observed in his last interview before his death, which you can find online, this is the Job Archetype, and this is the way over your lifetime your ego builds up. So if you think of a little toddler who doesn't know any better, but at some point when they're 2 or 3, mommy or daddy slaps their wrist for doing something, or gives them a spanking to try to stop them from doing something, or whatever it is. And so that's painful, and that's a defeat, and they lament about that, and then they're reborn, in their ego starts to emerge as something separate from what it was before. And that keeps happening through life. And so what Dr. Jung's observation is that you want to have your ego pretty strong before you're playing around with these archetypal elements that are in your unconscious. And Thomas says the comment about my comment about the value of creativity. He says, as a writer, that statement rings the bell of truth for me, and I'm sure it does. Dan says, to all those watching, reading the chat, I highly recommend supporting Skip's work on Patreon. Not many channels producing content at this level. He deserves our support. Thank you very much, Dan. Sharing and liking also helps, and yes, that definitely will help. And Sean says, thanks for the stream. Thomas says, revisiting Secret of the Golden Flower, pondering my underlying linings from decades ago. Thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, every time I get into this, into some of these things, which I've read years ago, I get deeper and deeper, and I learn something more every time I do. And, it's the same as watching this movie, Arrival, which is so full of Jungian material. As I say, we've watched it about 10 times, and we're getting deeper and deeper into it. And it's just an incredible movie when you appreciate what they've done with it. I did a reading this morning from this book. Let me get my... Okay, so it's Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. This is volume 2. And this total project is to have 3 volumes, which will be 50 essays by Jungian analysts about the Red Book. And I urge you to get into this series because it's extremely powerful. Each one of these analysts looks at the Red Book, a different facet of the Red Book, a little bit different, each one of them. And so it becomes like a diamond. And I first read the volume 1 at Christmas time, and I did do a number of readings. If you look at the Red Book playlist, you'll find 14 videos where I was reading from volume 1, with the exception of today I did number 14, which is from volume 2. And I urge you to take a look at those videos, especially the early ones. In the early ones, I was reading from an essay by Thomas Arzt, who's one of the editors of this book, along with Mary Stein, another famous Jungian. And so I urge you to take a look at these books and take a look at my readings, and you'll start to see how powerful they really are. Not my readings, but these essays. And Thomas says, Arrival is free on Amazon Prime, by the way. I think I bought it back before it was free. But anyway, when you see the writing of the aliens, if you haven't seen this movie, the writing of the aliens is in the form of the Ouroboros, which is a major part of the early psychological development of humanity. And if you look at Erich Neumann's book, The Origins and History of Consciousness, you will find that about half of his book relates to the Ouroboros. And so the method of communicating of the aliens is exactly different images of the Ouroboros. Sean says, I enjoy reading Carl Jung out loud with my coffee by my side. It helps me reset my day if it's going bad. I think that that's a great idea, Sean, and actually my readings of it have been for that kind of a purpose with me too. So anyway, peace. Thank you all for joining tonight, and I'll see you next week at 8 p.m. Monday, or I hope to see you on Thursday at 1:30. If you haven't already joined that group, I will be sending you the links for the Zoom session between now and Thursday. So see you then. Take care now.